that is not how government outformed by the people is supposed to work, and that is how the corporate veto works. It wasn't money in elections, it was like all those other cases that just vetoed good, decent laws that most people want, that don't hurt anybody, that maybe, will change the margins or profit of one company or another a little bit, one way or the other, but really are what any self-respecting democracy ought to be able to decide in a democratic process, not in the courts. We can't, because of Citizens United and corporate speech. And that's where Citizens United came from. And it makes some sense if you agree that corporations have a right not to speak or a right to speak, and they're just like people, then, well, elections are even more important, so they better have a right there too. And that's why we have to change all that, and that's why the People's Rights Amendment doesn't just say, we have to overturn the Supreme Court and allow us to limit spending in elections. We have to get back to the notion that corporations are entities created under state law. They're privileges from the people. We decide that limited liability is a good idea. We decide that perpetual life of a corporation that keeps going long after we are all gone, that those are privileges from the state. A corporation, you can't do it unless there's a state law. There can't be a corporation unless there's a state law that comes from us that says, and I think there's good reasons to say it. I think limited liability and the corporate laws actually, they need some reform, I think, but there's nothing wrong with that as an economic proposition. It's when that, as William Rehnquist said many times, it's when that economic power that's won by the advantages that come from the state are leveraged into political power and used against the people. That's what's wrong, and so that's what we have to change. And I'm so happy to tell you we are. So let me turn to how we're winning, and we are. The constitutional amendment is a big hurdle, but it is an exciting, historic hurdle when it is warranted by the times, and it is warranted by the times. So right now, what you need, Article 5 of the Constitution requires two ways to do it. One is by a convention. For free speech for people, we don't think that's the best way to go. We haven't had a convention since Philadelphia in 1787. We've gotten 27 amendments done in times as hard as ours without a convention. So we think the other way will work, or at least we ought to give it a try before going to the dramatic and sort of unpredictable thing of having a constitutional convention. The way we've always done it before in America is we need 2/3 of Congress to vote an amendment resolution out to the states, and then it gets ratified by 3/4 of the states. Now, I can't hear you laughing, but you're probably laughing inside. How are you going to get 2/3 of Congress who can't agree on anything to do this? Here's how we're going to do it, and it's already happening. We are going to ask Congress. In fact, right after the decision, we went down and met with Donna Edwards, a congresswoman from Maryland, who said, Citizens United is the Dred Scott of our times. And it took me a moment, and remember the Dred Scott case you may know about was the 1856 case when the Supreme Court said African Americans, direct quote from the Supreme Court of the United States, have no rights that the white man is bound to respect. That's in the law books. It was the decision, they thought they were doing the country a favor, and we'll just settle the slavery, and we'll just carve out all black African American people as non-people, and then everything will be, this great divide of the slavery and non-slave states will be fixed. Not such a good idea. The country was forced then to confront this fundamental evil in our system, this fundamental contradiction of the government outformed by the people. It gave birth to the Republican Party and Abraham Lincoln, and sadly enough, the Civil War, because it forced Americans to say, can we live with ourselves? Is this really the America we're going to have or not? And the sides were chosen, and it had to be resolved. But that's what she meant. It's that kind of, not that it's Civil War time, but that it is a statement about who's a person, who has rights in this country, that we are forced now to confront. If we accept it, we accept it and we just go on and we begin, I think, the decline into plutocracy and a sort of corporate state like there are some examples around the world right now. Or we stand up. And so she stood up, she introduced the first constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United into Congress. Since then, though, in only a couple of years, we now have 13 different amendment resolutions pending in Congress. And it's not because we think 13 are a good idea, it's because the people are demanding it, and Congress people now want to be seen to say, I have an amendment too, and I have one too. So, and the reason they're doing that is not because we're just asking Congress to do it, it's because we're organizing events like this all over the country, and then we're having votes. We're forcing people in state legislatures, in Congress, in town councils, to say where they stand on this fundamental issue. And we do that with a resolution calling on Congress to send to the states a constitutional amendment that overturns Citizens United, returns free and fair elections to the people, and I'm stopping there actually, which I'll say for a reason, but it calls for a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United, and 300 plus towns and cities have now passed that across the country. 7 states are now on record, after going through their whole political process and through the State House, as condemning Citizens United and calling on Congress to send an amendment to those states. They include states like California, Vermont, Massachusetts, but they also include states like New Mexico and Maryland, and a special mention for Montana. Some of you may have followed the Montana case that challenged Citizens United. They said, in Montana, we've been restricting corporate spending in state elections for 100 years because the corporations, particularly the copper corporations, owned Montana, literally, until we did, and we had a referendum to get corporations to get back to business and stay out of politics. Surely the Citizens United decision couldn't have meant to restrict states' rights. And this is sort of a Montana, Western states' rights kind of argument. And we have a right to enforce our law, and we're going to do it. They got sued by a corporate front group. They defended, they won the case in Montana. Montana Supreme Court agreed Montana has a right, and the people of Montana have a right to do this. Went up to the Supreme Court, we filed a brief, Free Speech for People, with the American Sustainable Business Council and businesses on our side, and many others, of course. And we said this, in the state attorney, the Attorney General of Montana did as well, of course. And we said, you have a chance, Supreme Court, to fix this problem you've unleashed on the country. Look around out there. Look what's happening as a result of Citizens United. Fix it. That's a paraphrase of the legal arguments we made, but that's what it came down. That's what it came down to. And we got some interesting statements from Justice Ginsburg, for example, joined by Justice Breyer, wrote that the court should take this case and reconsider Citizens United and overturn it in light of real experience, not the theories that they have all been proven wrong that they wrote about in Citizens United. No matter, the Supreme Court summarily reversed the Montana Supreme Court, said we're not going to revisit Citizens United, we're not going to fix this. And so Montana didn't go home. The people of Montana will have on the ballot in November, which they put on, they got 45,000 signatures in a relatively unpopulated state in about a month, to put it on the ballot to say corporations are not people. The policy of Montana is that we have a right to limit spending in elections by people and corporations to make sure we have fair, free elections. Corporations are economic entities. They instructed their congressional delegation to work for a constitutional amendment to reverse Citizens United. So this will all be on the ballot, and we'll be able to prove, I think, that when the people have a choice, the chance to speak out, you'll get Republicans, Independents, and Democrats supporting this. And so we'll see this in November. Of course, we'll be wildly outspent by corporate front groups, corporate money. We'll try to stop this. But we think it'll be a very interesting experience. It already has been, how determined people in Montana are to take this on, even after being told by the court, go home. Another ballot initiative like that is going on in Colorado in November as well. And so this is, the governor of Montana, there's a video at freespeechforpeople.org if you want to check it out, where the governor of Montana, he's a Democrat, says we're going to light a prairie fire that'll burn all the way to Washington. But he's joined, interestingly, by the lieutenant governor of Montana, who's a Republican, who says, we sure will, and corporations do not have the right to dominate our democracy. So we're seeing in Montana what, and my point here tonight is that this is an American project, and we can get an American consensus to fix this.